Honorable Minister, Shri Anil Madhavji, Shri Amitabh Kant, Chief Executive Officer, Niti Aayog, Ms. Shobna Kamineni, President-Designate, CII, Mrs. Seema Arora, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming you to the 11th edition of the Sustainability Summit. We are indeed privileged to have amongst us today Honorable Minister Shri Anil Madhavji, Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Honorable Minister, I am indeed grateful to you for sparing your valuable time to inaugurate this flagship event of the CII-ITC Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development. An extremely versatile social crusader, Honorable Minister is a renowned environmentalist, a river conservationist, and a writer too. We are confident, sir, that your stewardship of this important ministry will indeed go a long way in pursuing India's quest for sustainable development, as well as pursuing India's clarion call for climate justice for developing economies in the global community. I am also delighted to welcome Mr. Amitabh Kant, Chief Executive of Niti Aayog. His dynamism and out-of-the-box thinking is well known. Thank you very much, sir, for being here today, and we keenly look forward to hearing your insightful views on this important subject. The last year, in many ways, has been historic as far as the world's journey towards sustainable development is concerned. Led by the UN, the world adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. These goals represent a new and bold agenda to deal with the multidimensional societal challenges that we face today, be it poverty, inequality, or the issue of environmental capital, replenishing and preserving the environmental capital. Earlier this year, 175 nations converged in Paris to adopt the UN Climate Change Agreement. Both these developments indeed give rise to a new hope that the planet in future is going to be safer and secure. Whilst there is hope, I think clearly the task ahead is extremely difficult, it is challenging. We are in a race against time, a race to create livelihood at an unprecedented scale for the millions of jobless youth before they become a source of social unrest. It is also a race to replenish the environment before it chokes up growth and leaves behind a barren climate. The UN estimates that the world will have to create at least 600 million jobs over the next decade. And that's not all. 1 billion people will need to move out of abject poverty. So this requires not only a higher growth trajectory in the fragile economic and global environment today, but also growth that is inclusive and growth that leads to creation of sustainable livelihoods. And along with these social challenges is the alarming rate at which the environment resources are getting depleted. It is reported that 2016 is going to be the hottest year in the history of this planet. In the recent past, we have experienced certain weather events like intense storms, rising sea levels, depletion of the topsoil layers, successive cycles of droughts, floods, heat waves that have caused widespread devastation. And India too has had its share of problems. We have seen cycles of droughts, we have seen heat waves, we have seen floods, and these too have created widespread devastation in India too. India's socio-economic context is no different from the global challenges. There is no doubt that India is the best performing economy today and is poised to become the third largest in terms of PPP by 2030. But the scale and complexities of its challenges are daunting. There are over 300 people in the country who live in multi-dimensional poverty, and they will require critical support to live a life of dignity. And what is of extreme concern also is that 10 million youth come into the job market every year and are unable to find gainful employment. And as I mentioned earlier, this can actually become a source of social unrest. And societies, as you know, cannot progress with social unrest. Social unrest very clearly will negate development. It will create a world of conflict and uncertainty. The challenges for India are clearly immense. We need to create food, water, shelter, livelihood security for 1.5 billion people who will reside in India by 2030. And already, India's environmental capital is under stress. Although we are home to 17% of the world's population, we have only 2.4% of the land resources, and we have only 4% of the water resources and just about 1% of the forest resources. The need, therefore, to replenish the environment on a large scale has never been more critical and urgent. Inspired by our Honorable Prime Minister's clarion call for Make in India, with zero defect and zero effect, I am delighted that the Centre today is focusing this year on the theme of global goals and competitiveness. In this fragile economy, with prolonged periods of sluggish growth, enormous societal challenges, and coupled with the increasing impact of digitization, globalization, this whole meaning of competitiveness is getting redefined. And if India is to move on to a higher growth trajectory, which we are all confident it will, what this requires is that every entity within, every constituent of that economy attains extreme competitiveness. And it is indeed imperative that domestic enterprises become competitive by creation of intellectual capital, brands, national assets, because that is the only way that value will be created, captured, and retained within the country. However, given the societal challenges today, I believe extreme competitiveness by itself may not be sufficient. What is required today is responsible competitiveness, attaining extreme competitiveness in a way that is environmentally sustainable and that creates inclusive growth. It is no doubt a challenging task which will require, on one hand, enterprises to review, realign, redefine corporate visions, strategies, priorities, and on the other hand, it will require a government policy framework that encourages the development of such responsible competitiveness. We have seen that in the past, the issues of sustainability and the issues that impact corporate competitiveness have been dealt with in silos. In reality, the three imperatives for enterprises, or what is commonly known as the triple bottom line, financial, environmental, and social performance, have actually been dealt with separately, and it is often at the end bolted all together to achieve the larger objective of sustainable and inclusive growth. Now, this approach will only take us so far. It is somewhat suboptimal and is unlikely to have a transformative impact on society. The scale and depth of impact would be limited with this approach. What is really required is an integrated approach to deal with all three imperatives simultaneously, which means that priorities, strategies, policies all align themselves to create value in all the three dimensions of performance. Indian enterprises today have demonstrated innovative capacities to create world-class products and brands. Now, if these capacities are leveraged to create societal value, I believe it can have a transformative impact on the nation. Enterprises in the physical proximity of their operations are well placed to create a synergistic growth model that creates sustainable livelihood as well as leads to preservation of the environment. More than the financial resources that enterprises have to bring to bear their managerial capacity to ensure efficient and effective delivery of such projects. And I would like to say that it is eminently possible to create innovative business models that simultaneously build economic, environmental, and social capital. And I do not say this purely from an academic perspective. In ITC, the company I represent, we have been walking the talk for 2 decades. ITC is the only enterprise in the world of comparable dimension to be water positive, carbon positive, solid re-waste positive for several years in a row. Our business models help the creation of 6 million livelihoods, and this is along with a robust financial performance. It is heartening that we see a lot of enterprises today bringing the issue of sustainability and inclusive growth at the core of their business agenda. These are the enterprises of the future. The question, how can we multiply these efforts? How can they unfold? I believe we can do it. We need to create compelling drivers so that creating sustainable and inclusive growth is a conscious strategic choice, and it's not just merely left to corporate conscious alone. It is only when markets incentivizes, encourages innovation to create societal value will a paradigm change take place. The institutionalization of this market for corporate virtue, I believe, will be a critical determinant to ensure sustainable and inclusive growth. Recent global events have demonstrated that the markets, as they are today by themselves, do not lead to sustainable and inclusive growth. However, if we can have mechanism whereby preferential and differentiated incentives flow to enterprises that adopt sustainable business practice, I think a large change would happen. The civil society too can play its role by exercising its power of consumer choice by opting in favor of enterprises that follow sustainable business practice. And this itself can be an extremely powerful market force that will motivate and incentivize enterprises to adopt business models that are sustainable and inclusive. Now, to do this, it is necessary that a consumer, an investor, or policymakers are able to identify enterprises that adopt sustainable business models. I'm happy to share with you that the CII-ITC Center has developed the world's first sustainability label. It is based on a rigorous system of evaluation, and this label will help identify enterprises that are adopted sustainable business practices. And I would urge all the enterprises present here today to please get themselves rated and evaluated against this framework. This can be a source of competitive advantage in the not too far a future, as consumers will become discerning, policy and regulations will become more demanding. And I would also take this opportunity to request the Honorable Minister for his support in creating a policy framework that supports and encourages enterprises to adopt sustainable business models. I think such a support will spur innovation across the industry for value creation that meets the societal priorities. The CII-ITC Center would be happy to provide you suggestions in this context. In conclusion, let me wish all of you a very productive 2 days of deliberation. I'm sure during the 2 days, we will garner fresh perspectives and insights that will help us take this agenda of sustainable development to a new dimension. It is said that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. We owe it to them to leave behind a planet that is better than what we inherited. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.